Circle of Champions by the Indian Debating League, where we will be bringing to you the world's best debaters of 2025 and making you speak to them and their perspectives on this wonderful, extreme intellectual sport. At the Indian Debating League, we believe that Indian debating deserves to be world class and truly accessible to all. We are so excited to announce that we are funding and supporting more teams this year for the 2026 WUDC. Whether it's through international training, sponsorships, or sending more teams just overall to global platforms, our mission is to make debating excellent and a reality for everyone. If you are ready to take your debating to the next level, please enroll for the upcoming Indian Debating League workshops and tournaments. The link will be in the description. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Circle of Champions by the Indian Debating League. Today I have with me a very prestigious debater all the way from University of Tokyo in Japan. This young man in front of us has not only been a three-time national champion in Japan, but also a Octo-finalist in WUDC 2023 and broke in WUDC 2025 Panama. You already know his achievements because I've spoken about them. With this, I give the microphone to the man of the hour, Kotaro Yoshida. How are you, Kotaro?
Hi, thank you for such a nice introduction, Prane. I'm Kotaro Yoshida. I'm from University of Tokyo. I'm here to talk about my debating journey, starting from how many years ago? 7 years ago? Yeah, it's a pretty long time. I also participated recently into the Panama WUDC. We broke in the end. Did fairly good in the in rounds, did not do so well in the out rounds, but yeah, anyways, happy to chat with you. It's my pleasure to be invited here. I have no red line as to any questions. Just feel free to ask any questions you want. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely, it is our pleasure, and thank you so much for accepting the invitation in the first place. I think I asked this question to everybody, right? So before we even get into debating, I would like to know who is Kotaro. So if I were to spend one day with you, right, what would I see? What kind of a person are you?
What kind of a person I am? That's a very good question. How I would say, so my interests in things sway pretty quickly. So like I get interested in one thing, get bored of it soon, and then get interested in the other things. I think I don't know, but if you spend time with me, you probably will experience a lot of things in life. You know, so I think that's like an exciting part of myself. Yeah. Does that answer
Are
your
there,
question? Like, is that too abstract?
yeah, of course, I'll perhaps make it more specific. Are there any specific interests that we might get to see if we spend a day with you? Whether it's reading, I don't know, pottery, for example, anything in particular?
Oh yeah. So I absolutely love traveling. So traveling around the world, and especially going to like niche places like that not many tourists would go. So personally, I would take you to specifically very niche places.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
I think that sounds fantastic, honestly, and it makes sense to me as well to be a traveler and like debating, right? I think it goes hand in hand because
Yeah.
it's both an exploration, either of a topic or concept, right, or a place. So I think it makes complete sense to me. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that. So, you are also studying at the University of Tokyo. So I would like to know what do you study and how does this sort of interlap with your debating journey, or does it even?
Yeah. So I study law currently. I will probably be a lawyer in 2 years, I think. Um, Yeah, so I think, some people to say that the field of law and debating is similar in the sense that, you think about what the other side is going to say, you try to sort out what the clash and the main point of contention is going to be, you prepare your own arguments, present it in front of a judge, right? In the sense that judge in competitive debating or judge in the
Yeah.
court. Uh, so like it's very similar stuff. I would say it's a bit different in a sense that in just like in any games, like there's always some kind of specific rules, right? So, in the field of law, it obviously depends on jurisdictions, but at least in Japan, if you follow the past precedents of the Supreme Court, that's a very convincing argument. You don't have to provide a reason for it, but you can just say, well, this aligns with the past precedent, and that becomes a convincing argument. But like in debating, if you say, oh, there's a precedent in this, Supreme Court that says X, and then you don't give any logical reason, that's not a convincing argument, because the past precedent is just something that a random judge had said, right? So obviously there's like a variation when it comes to what the criteria for something to be convincing is, but at the core of it, it's just like logical thinking. Like people in the field of law call it legal thinking, but it's just like logic. You need to make sense, follow the steps. Yeah, so I guess, personally, so because I started debating earlier than I studied law, I personally think that I benefited massively from debating, because it's easy for me to, I guess, deploy many legal arguments and sort out stuff, because I'm more used to it than other people. Yeah.
I think, again, the best part about this answer is relatable to me because I'm also studying law in England, and I've also gone to be like from a debater to a person who's going to become a lawyer, right? So I can see those similarities, and I see exactly what you're saying when you say that there is that similarity, but the distinction is what sounds convincing in each room, particularly, right? And
Yeah.
it also makes me think that perhaps debating goes a step further and makes you question everything, right? Because in courts, if there's a president, of course, you can challenge a president as the opposing counsel if the sort of proposition says something. But at the same point of time, as the proposition, as the person making that citation, right, I don't need to justify that citation as long as I can show similarities between two cases.
Yeah.
Right? And I think debating would make you do that. You have to be slightly more analytical over there, and I think that's wonderful as an observation, particularly. Okay, just out of curiosity as well, what's the procedure to become a solicitor in Japan? Is it like
Oh,
5 years long, 6 years long? Is it 3 years
yeah.
long?
Okay, so I understand that in UK you have like two different types of lawyers, right? Like barrister and
Barristers and solicitors, yeah.
solicitor, right? We don't have that distinction. It's just lawyer. So basically there are two ways in Japan for you to become a lawyer. So one way is you take a so-called preparation exam. And then if you pass that preparation exam, you would be eligible to take the bar exam. If you pass the bar exam, you take 1 year of, I guess, like legal practice sessions and stuff, and then you become a lawyer.
So how long does this normally take?
So it depends on people, because so for the first part, like preparation exam, you can, like, anybody can take it in Japan. So if you are even like a 5-year-old, you can theoretically take that exam. Even if you're like 65 years old, you can take that exam. So anyone can take that exam. So even uni students can take these exams. So I guess the youngest you can become a lawyer in Japan is 23 years old, because you take you pass the bar before you graduate university, and then you take 1 year of like legal practice sessions and stuff, so you become a lawyer at the age of 23. Or the second way in which you can become a lawyer in Japan is you go to a law school. So law school is just different. So you have to take 2 additional years of law school, and then if you go to law school, you can take the bar exam. If you pass the bar exam, you will have to take 1 year of legal practice sessions. So essentially, it's like you do 4 years of uni, maybe 3 years depending on people, and then you do 2 additional years of law school, then do 1 year of, I guess, legal practice sessions. So yeah, it's a bit of a complicated process in the sense that you have like 2 separate systems. But yeah, you can become lawyer at a reasonably young age. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and I think a lot of countries have a long process for a person to become a solicitor, just general lawyer particularly, right? And usually it takes 5 to 6 years after you turn 18, and I think it's similar in Japan. But it's interesting to know that you have like 2 examinations. One is like the prep exam in order to be eligible in the first place, and I think that is what's not there in, I would say, England. England has the bar examination, but we don't have that eligibility examination for that bar
Yeah.
examination. So very interesting system. Okay, perfect. Now I won't waste any further time asking you my curious doubts about the legal system of Japan, whatever else. Right, I will ask you questions about debating. So please tell me how you have sort of been introduced to this extreme intellectual sport that is debating.
Okay. So yeah. So basically, in seventh grade, so in Japan, basically for my middle school, my middle school and the high school was the same school.
Yeah.
So I was going to the same school for like 6 years, 3 years each. Um, and then in the seventh grade, so basically in the like second middle school grade, right? My parents moved to Shanghai because of work. So I was like, I had a choice to either move to Shanghai with them, or just choose to stay in Tokyo. Uh, and at that age, I was like, just 1 year is not that a lot of time, so I would be okay with leaving Tokyo and my friends. So I tagged along my parents, stayed in Shanghai, and at the time I went to an American school. So that's like the first time I was exposed to English. So I basically learned English there. And then after I go back to school, one of my English teacher was like, "Oh, you went to American school for 1 year. You speak English pretty okay. So why not join a debating club? Like we started an English debating club recently. Why not join?" So that middle school teacher basically invited me to the club. So I just went there, joined a couple competition, and I was like, this is actually pretty interesting. I would be willing to continue that and just continued from that point onwards. Yeah.
Wow, I think it's again every debater's sort of journey is just generally to be told by somebody close to you that perhaps you can do it. But what kept you sort of involved in this process? Because now you said it's when you were in seventh grade, right? And I would
Yeah.
imagine it was many moons back. So
Yeah.
what's made you stay a debater, like even after high school, even after middle school, even after university, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So I think it's like I'm a pretty competitive person. So I really like competing, and I guess winning, obviously, because like losing is frustrating. So like that's obviously one part. I just want to win more and more, and there are many people who are better at debating than me. So probably winning against these people, is pretty something that I want to work on, and that's like one reason why I want to continue. The other thing is just like, uh, as time goes on, I can feel that my perspective on like many emotions, many debating topics change differently. Like I consume more news, more information, and then over time, and then as I get more experience, like the things that I talk about in the same exact motion radically changes, for better or worse. So I think that's like a very fun part of debating for me, in a sense that I compare my past self to the present self and think about how I grew up as a person. Maybe didn't grow up that much in terms of height, but yeah, emotionally, and I guess in terms of the perspectives that you have in life, I can feel that I improved quite a lot. So I think that's like a very fun part of debating as well. Yeah.
I think that makes sense, honestly, and particularly the context of how debating makes you feel when it comes to a loss as well. I think that's what really makes a person strive. When you really can't deal with a loss. Sometimes I remember mentioning this to my mom once that oftentimes if you're doing really well in debating as well, it's giving you that high. You're also thinking to yourself, well, if I have to humble myself and tell myself there's somebody out there who's better than me, right? Which
Yeah.
obviously there are people who are better than me. There are situations where you think to yourself, what will I do after so many wins where somebody actually beats me, right? And it slightly haunts you and makes you work even harder. And I
Mm.
think that when you go to the international circuit and you meet so many different cultures, it particularly makes things even more competitive and gets that fire alive in you, right? So
Yeah.
based on that fact, I'd love to know, like, is what differences did you face when you went from like domestic debating to international debating? Like, were there differences? Were there
Um,
things you had to sort of shift in your perspective or in your way that you debated topics?
yeah. Yeah. So of course, domestic tournaments and international ones are very, very different. So is your question specifically targeted towards judging or other things?
Anything is fine. You can speak about from a
Anything.
judge's perspective. Like, it's all open doors, Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously, the international competitions are so much more competitive than domestic ones. Like, not just because of the number of teams, but I think pretty straightforwardly, there are many great people in many different countries, and especially like people who are willing to spend a bunch of money for airfare, like flight tickets, and willing to spend a bunch of money on registration fees for an expensive international tournament. Like, obviously these people are pretty good, practice a lot beforehand. So naturally there would be only pretty reasonably good people coming into this tournament. So obviously, going into international tournaments, I felt like it was just much different. Um, Also, it's like in terms of I guess the circuit, because the Japanese circuit is not very big. I think people know each other sort of, or at least people heard of their names or judged before, and I think it's like inevitable bias in human being that when you see a person that you've known or you feel closer proximity to, you are more inclined to believe what they say. It's like if a random person that you've never met who come from a radically different cultural backgrounds all of a sudden says something is true, I don't believe you that easily. Like, obviously I would believe you if I was judging, but obviously there's like a subconscious mental barrier that you set.
So I think in psychology there's a term called mirroring, right? Which makes people more likable, more influential, things of that nature. And I feel it's like this is naturally happening when you come
Yeah,
and meet somebody who's from your background, speaks the way you do, looks the way you do, things of that nature. So it makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So I didn't really feel any struggles when it comes to, like, I guess the results, because the intuition that I had and the intuition that the judges and other people around me had was pretty same, and when I say some arguments, people were more willing to believe me. So it's like I didn't have that sort of frustration in the domestic tournaments, but when I went to international ones for the very first time, it's like many people weren't willing to believe what I say. Maybe because the way that I delivered was like pretty new to them, wasn't that convincing, or maybe a cultural differences, or the subconscious biases, whatever the factor that might be. It's like very difficult to convince a person who come from radically different backgrounds and who barely knows your name. Um, so like that's an obviously challenge that I faced. So from then I was like, I had to learn from people who seem convincing universally to many debaters in many circuits, and that typically tends to be good debaters whose debating speeches have been recorded online on YouTube, for instance. So I was just trying to go through like a bunch of YouTube channels and YouTube videos, and sometimes Facebook videos as well, of great debaters' speeches, and was trying to sort out like what types of arguments, what types of styles speak to as many people that come from different backgrounds. Yeah, so I think that's like additional efforts that you have to put in when you go to an international tournament. You have to know what is convincing to these people. Yeah, so I think that's like a big difference. I would also say it's like sometimes not now, but like when I barely knew anyone from the circuit, it was like a pretty lonely experience as well. The international tournaments, because like not many people from Japan go to an international tournament. So, but like when you go to an Asian majors, right? Like the first time I went to ABP, so where I was judging, only like 5-7 people were there in Japan from Japan circuit, and then the rest of Southeast Asia, and there were some South Asian contingents as well. Seem to know each other more. Maybe. So yeah. That a bit of a feeling of isolation in that sense. But obviously, so you have to do not just one, but multiple international tournaments, or have to keep interacting with many people, so that they would know your name, they would be willing to talk to you, and they would be willing to be your friends. So I guess, maybe the first time you go to an international tournament, you feel lonely. You don't. Uh, I didn't feel lonely. Luckily, I think the AVP 20, the first AVP I went to was a pretty great experience for me. But can be a very tough experience for some people. Yeah, I think that's like a major difference.
I think that's a fantastic observation, and we've seen this reflected across like certain interviews that I've done. Everybody mentions how culture plays a big role, but I think what you've done particularly is like mechanize the solution for it, which is versatility. Like I think every person gave me a very specific solution. Usually, it was something around the concept of if you're going to debate in the UK, particularly, right? You need to understand UK culture. If you're going to the US, you understand US culture and things of that nature. If it's Vietnam, then Vietnam culture. But I think what you've told me is there are some debaters who fare well or similarly across all these countries who you will find on YouTube or
Yeah.
wherever else, right? You
Yeah.
hear these fairy tale stories come to you from your seniors or somewhere else. And generally, if you learn from them and observe them, you will become a versatile debater. I think versatility is sort of, or adaptability particularly, is something which is a skill which one can't put a number on or a price on. So I think that's a wonderful point. And before we quickly move on to another point, is there any like sort of debater you want to give a shout out who's been a role model, or perhaps somebody that you've been watching and observing and studying as a person you would imagine to be versatile in these international circuits?
Oh, there are too many people.
Too many.
Too
No
many
shout
people
out.
to name.
No shout outs, particularly no one or two people that you remember from YouTube or like one video on YouTube that you watched, things of that nature.
I mean, obviously, everyone would say this, but I personally love Shen Wu's EUDC 2008 semifinals, I think, speech. It's like,
Is there something specific which stands out?
it's like, so I think the motion was about like, desecrating religious sites in the context of war. And every argument that he makes, or every rebuttal that he presents, the way that he presents it. So the first thing is that it's the content. Obviously, the way that the argument was constructed, it's very difficult to refute. It's almost impossible to refute. And then the second thing is like the way that he presents things, makes the argument sounds like an absolute truth. As in, it's like he's saying the obvious things, right? And I think that's one of the things that you have to do in debating. As in, you have to make it sound like the conclusion of the argument is the obvious answer. It's the absolute truth. And then you try to give reasons, mechanisms, context, all that things, so that the argument, the end conclusion, seems most obvious. And I think, I think that, that speech was, excellent in that regard, in the sense that everyone, like, not just like, career judges in debating, but like if an average person in the street would probably agree that's an awesome speech. And then, that's a skill that's like very difficult to master. So, personally my favorite. Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. Uh, I think I hope anybody watching this video goes and searches this up, this YouTube uh, video that we've just spoken about, and watches that debate and sees the points perhaps Kotaro is making, right? And I think one can learn a lot, especially the upcoming debaters, wherever you are in the world right now. And I also want to add this in that you spoke about culture and how you felt as though you felt slightly isolated. Some teams from South Asia were sort of stringing together because they perhaps met each other at other international tournaments, right? But you
Yeah.
felt isolated. Do you feel that is a problem in the Asian circuit right now, that we aren't particularly neither united or are having the debating resources in comparison to some of the bigger countries in the West, or let's assume Australia, right? Or do you feel Japan in particular, let's say, right, has those capabilities? So let's assume. So I would like to just know your understanding basically of the current circuit in one
Yeah.
Japan domestically, one Asia as a whole, right? And then like the West and other powerful countries in debating who've had like a good historical stance, and just show
Yeah.
me the differences. Do you think there are things where we are lacking, or things where they're just better than us, and how perhaps we can bridge that gap?
Okay. Yeah. That's a very good question. So I think Asian circuit, I think people tend to um, label Asian circuit as like a one big regional circuit, but it has so much diversity within it. Um, so personally, I think at least you have to separate into three different divisions. One is South Asian circuit, and Southeast Asian circuit, and then Northeast Asian circuit. So Northeast Asian circuit, just for clarification, is like, China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, all those regions and circuits. Um, so I think the judging style. So I actually don't know much about South Asian circuits because I haven't seen as many judges or as many teams. But I personally think that the Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia is like very different in terms of judging styles. Um, I can't really put it into a like into like a good like language. But it's like it feels very different. Like the arguments that people make are very different. The way that the argument is internally structured is very different. Uh, so I think in a sense, we only have like two Asian majors each year, and some people choose not to go there, because of various reasons. So it's like I would personally love more integration of these circuits, because if we understand each other more closely, probably we would be better judges and better debaters, far more than we used to be. Yeah, so that's like the main take on Asian circuit things. I think we are seeing more and more, I guess, interactions within Northeast Asian circuits. Like personally on the Japan circuit, I think particularly right after the COVID era, people were like not willing to spend as much money on traveling and going to a international tournament because it used to be very cheap. Online tournaments were super cheap, and now all of a sudden it's like so much more expensive. But then because in-person tournament is just more normalized over time, people are more willing to spend money on international tournaments, I guess. So I guess we're seeing more of our Japanese debaters flying to, Korea for Korean tournaments, or maybe China for Chinese tournament as well. So I think that's like a good thing. I hope that trajectory would continue for into the future. Yeah. So and in terms of how Asian circuits can probably can be more successful in the future against other circuits.
Yeah.
So obviously Panama was like a very hard year for us because it was super inaccessible for many Asian debaters. So in terms of the number of teams, we
I
didn't
was
have
going to
many.
ask about like any accessibility problems, whether it's financial, whether it's like sort of
Yeah,
this geographical, right? Overall,
yeah,
things of that nature. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. In terms of like financial stuff, depends on obviously the circuit, but at least from Japan, like barely any universities fund international tournaments fees. So you have like a lots of U.S. unis funding these rich kids, layering reg fees for like the expensive international tournaments. Like we don't have any of those things. So obviously we come from quote unquote relatively privileged countries. I understand that Japan is economically more privileged than many other countries. But I would say that in terms of the economic perspective of just an average university student, I don't think it's much different from other countries, because the minimum wage of Japan is like $7, about $7, maybe $8. Yeah, it's not that expensive, right? Like it's not that a lot. So if you're an average university student who just does a normal part-time job, you don't earn that much money, right? And then because like recently, the Japanese yen is like massively devalued. U.S. dollar is just too strong. So we need pretty substantially more amount of money to do the same things in other countries. Yeah, so it's getting pretty tough in terms of financial situations because no university funding. Um,
I think
Yeah.
this is a big problem in most Asian countries just generally. And I don't think I'm generalizing because I've not come across somebody or a country in Asia where people have had it slightly different, you know. For example, in India as well, one observation which has been made for the last couple of years actually is that in India, one of the biggest things or biggest skills somebody can have, especially in the public sector, is persuasion or diplomacy or debating.
Mm.
Given the geopolitical climate and the kind of things that India gets involved in, right?
Yeah.
And yet there is no sort of active promotion from the public sector of debating, or I would say there's no active promotion in the sense of recognition. There's no national, let's say, debating award in
Yeah.
India, right? And those kind of things make an impact on how people perceive the intellectual sport in the first place.
Yeah.
And I also feel as though there are lack of grants. I mean, I am particularly happy with the Indian Debating League, which is IDL, right, who I'm representing
Mm.
right now, because they sponsor teams to go to the WUDC every year, and they try to help out wherever they can. But of course, I think we also recognize this, and that's the goal which IDL has, to sponsor as many teams as possible, make it as accessible as possible. But till the time, I feel there's a mass shift towards the perspective on debating, and people don't look at it as a high school thing. You know, if you realize these world
Oh,
championships and other things, whether it's like a karate, whether it's something like a any other world championship in particular, people treat it like an adult sport. But when it comes to
yeah.
debating, I feel as though it comes across as a university activity, or a schooling activity. And I think it should really branch out to be more than that, you know. I mean, it's just some of my thoughts randomly off my head, so it's not a question per se, but it has definitely implications on how the Asian circuit will behave, or perhaps all these different global circuits. Yeah. What do
Yeah,
you think
yeah,
about
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so well, I think at least in the context of Japan, I think there are quite many old dinos coming into domestic tournaments. Uh, not that frequently, but like sometimes show up. So I think that's like a very good part of our circuits. Yeah. Sorry, what was the question? Or
Yeah, I
what
was
was
going to
the
ask you.
yeah?
I mean, I didn't get to ask if you want to comment on what I said, but uh, so I think my question particularly is: do you think there's something that's specific in these international circuits, perhaps let's say the US, right, which has always been so strong, and Australia as well? We've seen Australian debaters do
Yeah,
so well.
yeah.
Of course, England as well. Uh, do you think there's something in specific about these circuits which makes them better? I mean, I know finances is one aspect. I know the accessibility part as well. I think a lot of the WDCs are based around where these debaters will come, of course, because where they go, the money also flows, right, economy-wise. But
Yeah.
another, I think, question I have is related to training, their approach to debating. Or do you feel it's
Yeah.
also because of the cultural context the debate is set in? So it's just naturally easier for them to be versatile from a young age, maybe for two reasons. Number one, their countries are more diverse than ours in terms of the multinational element. You know, I think US is
Yeah.
far more multinational than India is particularly. You know, Indians,
Yeah.
you'll find Indians. But yeah, similar. It's just some thoughts over there.
So obviously the caveat is I do not know how university debaters in US or European circuits prepare. So I cannot comment how they privilege themselves or whether the privilege exists in the first place. But I personally think that the debating as a game um, benefits from the numbers of participants of the tournament, uh, and also the power of the country in question. So you go to an international tournament, you get like a pop culture emotion, for instance. Everyone in that room would talk about US specific example or I don't know UK movies, right? I mean, it's like an inevitable part because everyone can speak English, but some people cannot speak, other languages, or not consume, non-Hollywood movies, for instance. So obviously, like if you are, living in, say, for instance, in my case, Japan, I actually don't know many examples that people name of Hollywood movies or Hollywood content and stuff. Like the pop culture phenomena, the social media trend on like, US TikToks. I don't know any of this stuff. But people keep telling, those examples and the judge would be willing to buy it. I have no, knowledge of that phenomena, so I cannot really rebut it. But also a lot of the motions, because a lot of articles come from those backgrounds, would probably set up motions regarding that topic. Say for instance, not just like pop culture, right? In general, right? So for instance, like you know, at the end of like 2024, 4B movement was like on the rise. In the US, it's like some tournament set motions about 4B movement. but in Japan, like when you tell people about
For the
4B,
audience, can you explain what the 4B movement is so that they understand why I laughed in the first place?
mm-hmm.
Can you
Sorry.
tell the audience what the 4B movement means for anybody who doesn't know? Because then they'll understand the context of uh, what we're
Oh
talking
yeah.
about.
Yeah. So, 4B movement has originated from, I guess, a Korean feminist movement, I think. But it basically 4B stands for four no's. So no sex, no giving birth, no dating man, no marriage with man. Uh, and that phenomena became big in the United States right after the U.S. presidential election. So
Right.
Trump got elected. People were,
It was a
you know,
mass uprising against the
yeah,
toxic masculine figure that they have. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So
yes.
it's basically like a backlash against the Trump administration and
Yeah,
stuff.
no, yeah.
But yeah, so we don't have any of that stuff. Like you tell a random person in street in Japan, do you know what phobia is? Like no one would be able to genuinely answer this. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think that's a disadvantage that perhaps people from other countries faces more than people from UK or US because we don't know that examples. We don't know what the trendy topic is right now. So like that's like a trivial thing, but one that I feel is particularly big when it comes to like say feminism debate, when it comes to pop culture debate or even narrative debate. I feel that I guess disconnection. Um, yeah. Also, I think that there are you know more tournaments held in these countries. So say Oxford IV, Cambridge IV. Um, I would love to go, but I'm not sure if I can afford it this year. I didn't go last year because I was like, yeah, I'm not willing to spend that much money on that prep tournament for Panama. Yeah, I was just a bit lazy. But you have to be extra, I guess, hardworking if you're living outside of these circuits to be just as good. Maybe like it's not impossible for you to be good at super good. Like you can try to host like a bunch of online spars with like good debaters from other circuits and do all that stuff. But like that's like twice, three times, four times as much of job you have to put to get to the same level of playing field. Um, yeah, so that's like my personal take.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Now, this is out of curiosity, right? If we had to debate a motion in Japan with
Yeah,
Japanese cultural contexts, right? Whether it's
yeah,
pop culture, whether it's economy debates, whether it's anything else, what kind of motions would we see? And say it loud, say it proud, say any references that you want to, which come to your mind particularly, and anything in particular, so that we can remember this. And if whenever there are international tournaments, and if we are ever in a position to set the motions or decide the chits
yeah.
of motions, at least we can see that more often, and perhaps give everybody something new to debate on. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think so in terms of I guess personally one big difference that I see is like on religion motion. We
Yes.
barely see religion motion because most people in our country is not religious. It's very like complex. So I gave a motion about this like I guess at the tournament 2 years ago. Like there was like a tournament called Tokyo IB. I was on the Ashcore and I said a motion about spiritual fluidity. So spiritual fluidity is basically like you don't subscribe to one particular religion. You're not like static in your religious identity. You believe in various religions. So you go to you believe in Shintoism, so you go to shrine on New Year, and then you go to, uh, you know, uh, then when your parents or your relatives die, how what's the ceremony they're gonna have? You're gonna do it in Buddhist way, and you go to the temple if you want to pray for something, and then in Christmas you would do it in Christian way. Like so, I think lots of people are more secularized. Um, so that's like a unique part of our culture. So, when I
That's
gave
very
that
different.
motion,
It's very new
yeah,
concept. Really, yeah.
yeah. That concept is very foreign to many people from other countries. So when I gave that motion at the Tokyo IB, uh, there was more Japanese teams winning against non-Japanese teams in that motion.
Of course. Yeah, I think that's
Obvious
new.
reasons,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like you don't have to do like a research or method prep. You live with it. Like of
Exactly.
course you know more about this. You can illustrate better. So I think like that's like definitely one part. Like one I guess good example. Um, Yeah.
Is there any other motion in which comes to your mind? Or I think the example you've given is so beautiful. And I think a lot of debaters can go back and think about from their own countries, firstly, if they come from another country, right, which they
Yeah.
would have said. And also, in particular, how Japan is structurally, culturally, everything basically different from the motions
Yeah.
you generally face. So the kind of motions you have to face are just not second nature, right? You have to, like, this is a trained skill that you have.
Yeah.
I think another question I particularly have for you is uh, when you are given your 15 minutes, so I give you a motion, you have 15 minutes. What
Yeah.
is your preparation mantra looking like? Like, how do you really prepare? And
Okay.
what do 15 minutes look like? And
Yeah.
include your partner in this. Like, what is your journey with your partner?
Yeah. So I guess pretty much almost not everyone, not everything, but I think the majority of the international tournaments I participated, I teamed up with Nasa Tsuchiya. She's also from Tokyo. Uh, so we've been teaming up for quite a long time. I think the first time we teamed up is 2022. Um, so 2022 we did a bunch of prep tournaments to, you know, get better before Madrid Worlds. So we've gone quite a lot. We've done quite a lot of prep already. We know exactly how each of us would prep or would like to prep, how each of us would think, what kind of ideas that each of us would come up with, what kind of topics that we are good at. Um, so obviously that's like, so what I'm gonna talk about here is just like true for, I guess, more experienced team lineups, not for true for like first time teaming up with this person. Um, so basically, we take silent prep for like 3 minutes. If the topic is quite difficult, maybe 5 minutes. We discuss stuff that we came up with. So and in particular, we are very very keen on focusing on the concept of burdens. So I guess obviously we have to discuss on what the arguments are going to look like. So that's the first thing we're obviously going to discuss. But then, after we, sort of vibe check what the main arguments are going to be, we go on to, I guess, coming up with burdens. What is the necessary logic step for this argument to stand? What is the weakest part of the logic chain that we really need to explain quite a lot? Um, yeah, so yeah, we basically don't talk much about each individual mechanism. We don't need to talk about it because we already have burdens sorted out.
Yeah, you
So
trust each other with it, basically.
yeah, basically. So I usually speak the first speech. So I just give out mechanisms. But because NASA also knows what the burdens are going to be, even if I screw up, which I do quite a lot of the times. So even if I screw up my own speeches, she already has a burden. So when she's listening to my speech, she also thinks about whether what I say is sufficient to meet the burdens. So in which case, if I screw up, she can also come up with a separate mechanism in her own, right before her speeches, for instance. So there's some risk aversion that we can do by coming up with burdens. So obviously of not missing major logical point, but also I guess making sure that even if one of us screws up, the team is not going to screw up. Yeah, so I think personally, like the big part of the prep that I guess we are recently trying to focus on is on focusing on the burden of each internal argument. Yeah.
I think this is quite structured. Again, I think it's quite a thought out process, and it's individualized to this team. As you mentioned, this is an experienced lineup, right? And it makes sense. I think particularly the fact that there's a silent prep and then the writing down of burdens. Now, anybody who's a new debater who's gone so far into this interview should already know that a burden is something that you have to satisfy in order to win a debate, right? So let's assume you're debating that the death penalty should be abolished. I think one of the biggest burdens is to prove that it would be immoral for the government to have that kind of a power, for example, right? And then there are substantials within that would mechanize that particular burden and satisfy the same. So I think that's what we're headed towards. And I think this risk aversion tactic is also brilliant because generally, and I think you would agree with me when I say this, but I'd love your thoughts on this as well. At least first and short, when you get a motion in these tournaments, whether it's domestic or international, if there are 6 motions you get in the in the rounds, you you feel as though some of them, at least 3 or 4 of them, are always angled from a perspective you didn't expect it. Right? It's always slightly tilted, if it makes sense. Right? Slightly
Mm.
difficult to sort of just
Okay.
position your feet in initially. And I feel those 3 minutes or 4 minutes really helps you do that particularly.
Yeah.
You know, but also if if while speaking, because usually it's very extempo, write down a speech, right? Or it makes it easier for you to help the team as a whole. So
Yeah.
when you think of your speeches, you think of best team before you think best speaker. That's what I notice, and I think that's a top quality. Is generally, if it makes sense. So
Yeah.
now,
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think I'd like for you to also tell me more about, let's say, what you feel was your journey like in Panama. So give me like a cinematic experience. Like what happened? You get to know you're going. You decide to go. So you team up with NASA and you make that move. And what do you face over there culturally, from a tourist point of view, from a debater's point of view? What happens?
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
you have improved. What do you think you did right? Things of that nature. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously we decided to do Panama. I guess pretty early in the year. I think March, February, but pretty early on in 2014 to 2024. Um,
2014 is crazy.
sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
You were preparing for 11 years. Yeah, go for it.
11 years is crazy. Anyways, yeah. But I was busy with like other academic stuffs in 2024 um until like September. Um we were planning to practice from September onwards. So our practice started there. So we thought that the ABP this year, which was held I think October, I think. Yeah, somewhere around October. That was like the best timing for us. So we thought that hey, ABP is a good preparation tournament for Panama. So we treat it as a preparation tournament. And for context, I also want to note that the Panama Worlds we treat it also as a preparation tournament, in a sense that so both of us would graduate in 2027. So which means that Sophia Worlds is the last Worlds that we can attend. So we are planning that the Sophia would be the end destination for us as a team. Uh, so we've treated Panama to be the preparation tournament for Sophia. We should have taken it more seriously, but I guess the vibe of the team is that basically we shouldn't take it that harshly. We should just take it easy. Sometimes taking it easy is helps surely. Um, yeah, so we basically treated ABP this year as a preparation tournament of the preparation tournament. So we didn't practice that much, obviously. But yeah, so going into ABP, we did quite okay. I think we did. We broke in third or fourth place, and then we went to the finals. So we did a very impressive run. For compared to the lack of practice that we did. We did only like 2 spars in one tournament before ABP, but that was only possible because we've trained and practiced so much in before Madrid Worlds. We did so much practice there. So basically we were already used to the prep that we did back in the days. So we didn't have to. We just had to like sort of rehabilitate ourselves. Yeah, so it did okay. Um, and then so we obviously had a couple of, I guess, like an hour session where we reflect back on where we could have done better perhaps in AVP, and we basically reached to the conclusion that there are two things that we need to uh, get more improvements at. So one is obviously as I said, the concept of burdens. Sometimes we as a team miss the important burden, and like many great teams do. Like if you are like an debater who's struggling right now, I really, really encourage you to actually horn in on the concept of burdens and just try to think about whether you actually meet the burdens or not. Because I think, many teams do miss it. So we sometimes miss the critical burdens in the argument. So we were like, yeah, probably we should be more conscious of it in the preparation time. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The second thing is like we were pretty bad at closing. So I don't know why, but as recently it became much more difficult to extend over opening teams than it used to be in the past, as in it used to be around like 2023, like Madrid Worlds times. Probably because I think many teams got better at doing the basic arguments in 15 minutes. Maybe because there's like more training resources, or people just became better. But I think it's just like more difficult to extend. So we thought that closing strategy is a very important one. And we decided that, in the in rounds, we do not have to take a first in every round. Like, we don't have to try to, I guess, give a crazy extension that is super different from our opening, and one that might potentially win you the debate, but have a risk of potentially getting a fourth because the argument is just too crazy to be true. So we instead thought that we should take a more risk-aversion approach, where we probably extend over the similar points of the opening, mechanistically extend over it, maybe not take a first, maybe not even take a second, but avoid the fourth at all costs. So I think, that change in the mindset really helped in rounds in Panama. So let's go to the Panama. So I guess we did a couple of other tournaments before Panama Worlds. But for context, the preparation tournaments we've done, I guess we did 2 or 3. And then I think in both of them we didn't break. I think. Yeah. I think both of the preparation tournament we did, we failed to break. Pretty closely, but yeah. The point is we didn't break. But we broke in the actual one. So, you don't really have to care about the preparation tournament. Really. So going into Panama, it's a very long flight. So I had to take a transit in the Newark. So New York, Newark airport. How many hours was it? It's like super, super freaking long. So I guess it takes about 16 hours from Tokyo to Newark, and then like 5 years transit, and then to Panama you need like 6 hours or something. So it's an insane amount of time and just exhaustion going into Panama alone. But yeah, so when we arrived Panama, we were like, we were pretty exhausted, but we should probably spend a lot of time touring, because, otherwise I would be depressed. Like, spending all those times in a very, very small economy seat, and then all I get is just a debating tournament. Like, if I, only get a debating tournament in return for going through all those long hour flights, I would be pretty mad. So we decided to go to a lot of tourist places. We went to the canal. We went to like I wouldn't say it's a zoo, but like somewhere close to zoo. We've seen a lot of animals there, and stuff. Yeah, we did have a pretty good time, touring before the tournament. Yeah, and then going into the tournament, so we had to do 9 rounds, right? It's very, very exhausting. But so from day 1 to day 2, right? We surprisingly got a super, super good quality judging in most of the rounds that we were judged. So, if anyone's keen on, checking the tab, please do. But, like, the majority of the in rounds where we were judged, we got a very good judges, compared to, I guess, other teams. So we were very lucky. So we just had to give a reasonably good speech, to win or to get, good speaks and stuff. So that really helped in the in rounds. And then going into day 3, right? So that's like the most stressful part, because in day 3, for context, all the 3 rounds are silent. You don't know what the result is going to be. So that's like the main source of stress for most teams. So round 7, I think it's round 7. So we saw the tab, and we were on 12 points after round 6. So 12 points is not that high. So it's like it's obviously high, but it's not, we didn't expect that competitive teams to be in the same room with us in round 7. And then when we saw the tab, we were like, oh shit. We got, I guess, a pretty good Oxford team. We got a very good Manchester team in the same room with us. So I think that everyone else, all the other 3 teams, were pretty great teams in round 7. So we were like, we didn't really... And we also got closing opposition. So closing, we didn't like closing position. So we were like, maybe we'll get a fourth in this round. So that was like when we were pretty depressed the most during the tournament. So going into the round, so the motion was like something related to antitrust. The thing about, I guess, that round though is that right before the tournament, I knew that antitrust was a big topic in the United States because, for context, Biden administration used antitrust regulation as a mechanism to try to reduce the influence of big techs.
Yes. Just to sort of come in, for anybody who doesn't know antitrust as well, that's like a synonym for competition law in particular, right?
Yeah.
So anywhere where competition law comes into place, anything where monogamy or oligopolies come into place, I think that's where antitrust comes in. Yes, please continue.
Yeah. So thank you. So basically, we knew that antitrust would be a big topic. So I watched like a 2 minutes, 3 minutes brief explainer video that I found on YouTube. I think it was like from Wall Street journals that like where like a seemingly smart lawyer was explaining about how the concept of antitrust looked like, what what DOJ has to show in the antitrust cases to potentially break up Google and big monopolies, for instance. Anyways, all that stuff. So I took notes of all the things that were said in that 3 minutes explainer video, and printed out. So going into that prep, it was quite easy because I have watched a very brief, but a introductory explainer of how antitrust regulation look like. And the thing is, many teams in that room seem to not understand, but it's like seem to not have a clear picture of how antitrust regulation takes place. So antitrust regulation comes from mainly two different organizations if you are talking about the United States. So one is Department of Justice, DOJ, and then the second thing is the Federal Trade Commission, FTCs. And these two institutions do separate jobs. So for the case of DOJ, you try to break up the pre-existing monopoly mainly, and for the case of FTCs, you try to deal with newly emerging M&A deals and business transactions. So if a company A is trying to engage in merger and acquisition with a company B in a new deal, FTC is the main context, not DOJ, right? So DOJ does things retrospectively, post facto deal with monopolies, but FTC try to deal with future monopolies. So I think that even that level of, I guess, fairly basic understanding massively helped. Like, because not many teams know that. So that really allowed us to craft a very nuanced argument. Not going to explain in details, but very nuanced extension, I think, on how, well, I forgot the motion, but basically, the businesses would be massively harmed because of the very motion. After round 7, we backed up and we knew we got a second in that room, so we were on 14 points. So that really, really helped alleviate stresses. Because, if you're on like 12 points after round 7, you would be freaking stressed. Because, you need like 17 points, or, this year, for this year's case, maybe 16 points was enough. But basically, you want to be, if you are on 14 points, if you do not, even if you like fuck up in one round, you can still recover in the other round. So like that was a massive relief for us. And in the next round, we got a second, and we backed up, and we knew we were on already 16 points at the end of round 8. So at that point, we were like, we would probably progress. We would probably break open. So we were very, very relieved and had a very calm day 3. So in Madrid Worlds 2023, we had the opposite experience where we were on 14 points at the end of round 8. So we had to take a first in the last round, and that was a very, very stressful experience. So I really think that it's like, obviously a large portion is luck, like whether the motion given in these 3 rounds in day 3 actually matches to your knowledge, for instance. But personally, in that in round, I thought that knowledge is really, really important in, I guess, making the world's experience less stressful. Yeah, so we broke, and then in the first out round, so partial double octos, we lost. I think, a lot of our friends and a lot of people were watching that round and thought that we won. We heard some justification from the judges. We weren't perfectly convinced of it, but we can see why they chose to drop us. But the takeaway from this is that I think, maybe not a circuit specific way or anything, but I think, Outround is very unpredictable. We do not know what teams are going to advance. So the only solution is you break as high as possible in the in rounds. So that you don't meet good teams, or you can break protected and you don't have to do partial double octos. So that's like a main big take that I got from Worlds this year. Yeah.
I think that was so much, honestly. Like the amount of information I received personally was wonderful. I think a lot of people will benefit from this. A lot of good advice. Number one, I think the same, everybody wants to break and then they think to themselves they'll take one debate at a time. But this advice was trying to just go all in before the break to rank higher and meet the slightly weaker teams and have more chances. Things of that nature is wonderful. I also feel there's so many different nuances. Like you mentioned luck, but I was going to say something else altogether. I do believe it's preparation which made you win that one debate on antitrust, for example. Even 3 minutes per se, right? It shows even some amount of research, as long as you can pull it up and remember it from your notes or wherever else, is good enough.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, even though somebody might be local to some issues, they might not have as much nuance because they assume they have the nuance by nature, right? So while cultural context helps, knowledge is always power, right? Is what I understand. I think that's so fundamental to debating, just as is. So I think that's wonderful. This whole journey of yours sounds fantastic, and I think another part is just like I always call debating an intellectual sport, and I love calling it that because I feel it is that competitive, and I do feel it is a muscle. Your brain is a muscle. The more you exercise it, the better you get. The stronger you get, the more you can sort of be intellectual for. You can endure certain problems during your journey of trying to analyze certain things. But I also feel as though you've shown that one side of a sports person that others don't look at from debating perspective, which is periodization, right? When you say Sophia 2027 is the one that you're going for, and that these worlds have been preparation phases.
Yeah.
Number one, it relieves you of the stress of the now. It keeps you in the present, but it relieves you of that stress. You're always looking towards the future. But I also feel as though a lot of teams, especially the ones who have time, they understand they should not. They should play the longer game. Think of projects in terms of like 45-month or 45-year projects, if I may exaggerate, rather than 45-day projects, and automatically we'll see more improvements perhaps. As long as they're able to keep a sense of urgency to their amount of training, if that makes sense, right? I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I know I don't want to keep it for too long, so here's my plan right now, right? I'm going to ask you 2 questions and then we can take our leave. Sounds good?
Yeah, sounds good.
The first question, this is depending on your consumption of media in particular, honestly, right? I would love to know, and these are not related to debating, by the way. When we think of Japan, right? When Indians particularly think of Japan, we love our anime, right?
Oh.
Do you have a favorite anime? And if you do, what is that? And is there an anime you would compare to your debating career? Like, if you think of your debating career, do you think of a particular anime?
Debating career. Oh, it's different. So wait, let me check. So obviously I've watched plenty of animes. And I like many of them. So the current favorite that I'm watching right now is Sakamoto Days. Do you know? Yeah. So it's like a.
I personally don't, but I'm sure a lot of people do.
Yeah. So yeah, you can check it out on Google. Sakamoto Days. Yeah, it's a very popular one right now in the current season. I really like Jujutsu Kaisen as well. I also like Haikyuu, the valuable one. Yeah, and I don't know. I feel a great sympathy for Haikyuu's main character. So his name is Hinata. So he plays volleyball, but he's very short. And height in the context of volleyball is like crucial. Obviously, like you are short, it's very, so much disadvantage against other people. So when you position it in the context of debating, even if you don't come from maybe a privileged circuit with lots of experienced debaters, with lots of trainings given to you, with like loads of free funding, it's an inspiration that, despite that disadvantage, you can still try to compete at the high level. So I would pick Haikyuu personally. Yeah.
I think that is wonderful. I know Haikyuu. That's the good thing. Luckily, I know Haikyuu, so that's good.
Nice.
Personally, I've not watched a lot of anime, but I have so many weebs. They call themselves weebs. I don't know whether this is the right term for them, right? In India, and I know so many individuals who've sort of introduced me to good anime, whether that's like one of the more popular ones, of course, whether that's a Death Note, whether that's like a Naruto, whether that's a Banana Fish. Banana Fish was like particularly niche for me, but again, I will watch Haikyuu again,
Oh, nice.
I'm going to watch from your perspective. That's wonderful. And the last question. I'm, of course, assuming you know how to speak in Japanese, right?
Yeah.
I know that you do, I can speak in Hindi. We're going to try and say something in our own language so that the viewers can stay confused. And this is how I'll probably start the reel plan to promote this video with, right? Here's what I'm going to say. In Hindi, I am going to say that my name is Pranay Raj Bhalla, and it is my pleasure to introduce Kotaro Yoshida to the world, right, in some ways. And I would love for you to just say, sort of thank you for inviting me, or whatever you want to say. You can sort of translate it a moment later. But I would like to say my name as well, just for the bit of shout out. Okay, if you can.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Sounds good?
Sounds good.
Hello everybody, मेरा नाम है प्रणय राज भल्ला और मैं बैठा हूँ कोटारो योशिदा के साथ जो बहुत ही अच्छा डिबेटर है.
プラネイさん、この度は、インタビューにお呼びいただいてありがとうございます。本当に光栄な機会をいただいて、とても感謝しております。インドの皆さん、ぜひですね、日本に来て、アニメを見るなり、アニメショップとかですね、いろんな観光地がありますのでですね、ぜひぜひ、日本にお越しいただければなと思います。はい、連絡してくれれば、ぜひですね、案内とかもするので、よろしくお願いします。バイバイ。
That is so cool. That is
Okay.
It is so much fun to do that, honestly.
Yeah, it was very fun.
Yeah. There's a Hindi dialogue in a movie where Shah Rukh Khan says, "Picture abhi baki hai," and I feel as though this part of our interview makes me do another interview with you, and still left, right?
Nice.
But thank you so much for coming over, right? In some sense, for this interview. And I had a wonderful conversation with you. I'm sure debaters will learn a lot from you. I will stop this interview now. I will stop the recording. Just stay on call if that's possible for just a few minutes.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect.
Sure. Thank you for the interview.
Of course. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and subscribe.